So glad to be with you this afternoon, and especially glad to be celebrating one of our really distinguished faculty, Professor Tony Ortega. I want to extend a special welcome today to Father John Fitzgibbon, Society of Jesus, our president of Regis University, and our provost, Dr. Janet Hauser, who one hallmark of her tenure as provost has been the support of scholarship and the engagement of our faculty in their disciplines and the artistic achievements today, especially of someone like Tony. Also, my sincere thanks to many of our distinguished emeritus and emerita faculty, many of whom are past lecture presenters, who have joined us today for this lecture, as well as to all of you who are here with us today to celebrate what is surely one of the great events of our academic year. If you didn't notice in your program, this is actually the golden anniversary of the Faculty Lecture of the Year. So Tony is our 50th presenter. So Tony is well known for his art locally, regionally, and increasingly nationally and internationally. His most recent works feature cultural hybridity, a term we'll understand better once he concludes the talk. But I thought I'd give you a taste of it via this introduction, a sort of introductional hybridity, if you will. I don't want to spoil Tony's thunder any more than I would draw a mustache on any of his Mona Lisas. So don't imagine this is the real thing. Think of it rather as a layman's interpretation of an artistic method that provides a foundational layer for how Tony helps us see the world. And despite the powerful ways he addresses complex issues of personal and cultural identity, Tony embraces this approach in a highly playful way. A way where he says, ways that he say rely upon distortion and exaggeration to emphasize emotional effect. When I read those lines in a recent interview, I knew Tony would understand this introduction, even or perhaps especially if I took some liberties in the area of distortion and exaggeration. So how might we begin to construct a hybrid mosaic or a portrait of Tony, a layering of perspectives done in the spirit of hybridity? In doing such work, it's best to begin with some history or traditional work of art, I learned from Tony. So here's some history. Hailing from northern New Mexico, his mother's family came from Pecos, his father's side from Colinas, and Tony was born in Santa Fe. He spent his formative years traveling between Denver and New Mexico and was educated here too. And we, of course, at Regis have had the good grace of his presence for the last 15 years. So let's combine this foundational history with a layer or two of Western concepts of perspective and brilliant colors and inviting temperatures. Those, of course, are Tony's words. How am I doing, Tony? We doing okay? This hybrid? Okay. So here's a perspective. His students and his colleagues clearly love him, and for good reason. When they say things like, he's very generous with his time and always thinking of ways he can help other artists succeed, they frequently speak from experience. Here's some brilliant color. When they reflect on the impact he's had in their lives and how his art interpreted them through difficult personal times, they say, I hope Tony knows how much he is respected for his art, his teaching, his humanity. He's one of my very favorite people in the world. How about some inviting temperatures? Colleagues call him a force of nature, comment on his amazing community-based murals, which he's been painting for over 25 years, and call out how timely and important his, quote, bracing social conscience is for our country today. You see, an introductional hybridity, quoting his colleagues, is analogous to an artistic move Tony might call cultural hybridity in his work, a layering, in this case of voices, in Tony's work, a layering of images from contemporary culture or previous works of art, one upon the other, to bring complexity and social consciousness to emerging images. I've got that right, Tony? Okay, yeah. But of course, his colleagues include artists and musicians, and as such, they know something about art criticism. So, following Tony's advice to juxtapose unlikely images, here's another layer, this time from our distinguished Guggenheim Fellow, Willie Sutton. Doesn't it make sense to directly layer Willie's photographic imagination with Tony's work? Willie starts easy. Quote, Tony's an exceptional and inspiring artist and a wonderful teacher. He has been exceptionally successful in that most important responsibility of any artist, to get one's work out, to be seen, so that it can affect the state of the world. I fully admire him. But then, Willie starts asking some questions that perhaps have crossed your mind as well. He's a highly skilled printmaker, painter, draftsman. Though Tony has gained great success in all these media, a question remains. Can he draw a face? Think about the art you most love of Tony's. Have you ever wondered, just for a minute? Willie pushes his analysis further. Visit his website, review his pictures, except for pictures that Tony has appropriated, taken from some other source, like the Statue of Liberty or Edvard Munch's Scream, you will not see a single facial feature. Well, then Willie corrects himself. Well, there is a single mustache, but there's no eyes, no mouths, no cheekbones, no smiling teeth, no eyebrows, nothing. Perhaps that's why Tony has more recently moved into hybridity, the overlapping of images and meaning, a mode that might suggest a remedy to this issue of no faces. But Willie really wants to know. It has to be asked, does our premier Regis College art professor, teacher of drawing and painting to impressionable young minds, know how to draw a face? And if not, why can't he learn to draw a face? Does he have some mental block or visual flaw in his right cortex that doesn't allow him to recognize faces? After all, it's not that hard to indicate a face. A couple of dots for eyes, line for a mouth, you're all set. But Willie's concern is noble as well. He worries for Tony's students. I also wonder if we need to be concerned for his students. Are Tony's students missing out on an important aspect of drawing the figure? Is this something that can be confident his students will get in another course? What about assessment? Are we creating a new style of young avant-garde painters? The Denver School of Faceless Figures painting? A movement away from the specific? What's next? No arms, no legs? Willie continues, please do not misunderstand me. I love Tony's pictures. They're absolutely beautiful. And it's wonderful and inspiring to see how he has compensated for his lack of abilities, his facially challenged view of the world. And then he concludes, one does not need to absolutely fully understand everything, and clearly I still don't. But still, aren't faces sometimes important? Well, you see the point. Tony has actually heard this question before, and I promise you that after today's talk, you'll have a fairly elegant response to it. In terms of introductional hybridity, we could debate whether or not Willie's layering of analysis really helps us better understand Tony's art. But clearly, as Tony has explored hybridity in his artworks, such as Super Hombre with Sombrero or Mexican Gothic, he's up to something far more sophisticated than the introductional hybridity I've been trying out this afternoon. To the point, here's how Tony talks about his art employing a cultural or historical influence or hybridity. For me, Tony says, hybridity is the process that crosses two separate cultures. It's a constant process of negotiation between different cultural groups, a form of intercultural dialogue. So without doubt, Tony's work with hybridity is serious work in pursuit of serious ends. Tony exhibits his work in places such as the Denver Art Museum, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center. His papers are housed in the Smithsonian collection with other modern artists, and he's exhibited extensively in Latin America and other parts of the world. But he also favors small venues and galleries around Denver, in Santa Fe, especially most recently in Taos, where he has exhibited more than 12 studios and galleries. In fact, his title for today's talk, Doble Sentido, overlapping meaning, mirrors that of an exhibit currently staged at the Harwood Museum of Art in Taos. Speaking about that exhibit, Tony says, I hope my artwork puts a smile on their face, but also that they become aware that the etchings are layered in meaning. Hopefully they will see the overlapping layers of juxtaposition of cultures, traditions, social and political commentary, and walk away with a new or different view of what it means to be Chicano. This is the vital, challenging, playful, and indeed life-changing work that Tony has quite vividly embraced over the duration of his impressive artistic career. I'm humbled to be in the presence of such an insightful, dedicated, innovative, and generous colleague. We're in for a real treat today as Tony shares the world of his art and life with us. Would you join me in welcoming Professor Tony Ortega?
Wow, can't believe it. I remember coming to one of these first lectures probably 15 years ago, when I was first starting here. And thinking to myself, I was probably talking with Gene Stewart and thinking to myself, well, I don't think I could do that. I would have never saw, if you would have told me you're going to be up there one day, I probably would have looked at you like you're crazy. And then going back to when I was a student and when I first started at University of Colorado, I remember I was the first one in my family to go to school. And I thought professors were like the most amazing people I'd ever met on the planet. I go, they just know everything. Of course, now being a professor, I realize we don't know everything. But if you would have told me back then when I was a young student that you were going to be a professor, I probably would have looked at you like you're crazy. I want to acknowledge a few people and thank them. First of all, I want to acknowledge my wife, Sylvia Montero, my friend, my partner, person that's backed me for many, many years. Tom, I want to thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure working with you and for you. Father Fitzgibbons, what a wonderful university to be part of. Jan Hauser, also great supporter of our department and the arts. Thank you very much. My colleagues in the department, what a wonderful department to work with and work with you all. I want to specifically thank Dr. Barbara Coleman. She recently helped me edit a couple of articles. I appreciate it. And part of those articles are integrated into this conversation that I'm going to have with you this afternoon. But let's get started. Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes. Bienvenido. ¿Ya están listos? Sí. Good afternoon. Welcome. Are you ready to get started? Well, thank you for coming to my talk. I want to share with you a paragraph from my artist statement I wrote a few years ago and recently updated. I awaken each morning in North Denver, where I emotionally, spiritually, physically encounter the collision of cultures. One American and the other one Mexican. This is my daily dilemma. I traverse a border that is not the real Mexican-U.S. border, created for the separation of two nations, but rather a psychological border that is every bit as real. A border between two cultures. Here in West Denver, the northern frontier of Aztlán, the outpost of Latin America. Mine is a passage from south to north. In contrast, I am daily immersed in a dominant culture whose history is from east to west. On this personal journey, I need to change my thoughts and activities from Spanish to English, from a vision of community to one of capitalism, and from family to individual, and then back again. And yet my journey is not unique. It is a daily passage for many of my fellow Latinos. I ask the following questions for this talk and my artwork in general. Who am I? Where do I come from? And why am I here? I've been called or identified by these names many times throughout my life. I have also self-identified with one or more of these terms: Spanish, Spanish American, Mexican, Mexican American, Hispanic, Nuevo Mexicano, Latino, Hispano, Mestizo, Manito, Indio Hispano, Chicano. That's the term I prefer. I've also had some negative terms in reference to me: beaner, greaser, spick, and dirty Mexican. Here's a photograph of my father and I at a local coffee shop in Santa Fe in 2012. This is one of the many visits I had with him throughout the years. In the summer of 1977, after my freshman year of college, and with my mother's blessing and encouragement, I went down to Santa Fe to meet my father, Victor, for the very first time. I stayed at my uncle's home, and he contacted my father over the telephone. My uncle wanted to check with Victor before I just showed up at his front doorstep. That evening, I had my first conversation with my father. We agreed to meet the next day at a big boy restaurant. This was the start of an adult relationship I would have with him until his death last August. I wanted to see if I looked like him, walked like him, had expressions like him, etc. I asked, how much am I like him? His voice had a strong New Mexican accent, and he wore a cowboy hat and a Western shirt. He self-identified as a vaquero. As an adult, he worked full-time for the New Mexico Highway Department in its sign shop. He designed and silk-screened signs. What a coincidence. In this photo of my grandmother and I from 1962, I was 4 years old. We took the photo in a photo booth in the Greyhound bus depot in Santa Fe. I would nag my grandmother each time I saw one of these booths. She would oblige every once in a while. I was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, grew up in Denver, and spent my summers in Pecos, New Mexico. Growing up, my grandmother was the person I was the closest to. My grandmother was a seamstress, and she created quilts, clothes, and do alterations. She was the person I give credit to teaching me how to work with my hands and how to be creative. As a child, my grandmother and I traveled north and south on Interstate 25 on a Greyhound bus between Pecos, Santa Fe, and Denver. Throughout her life, she never drove a car. As a child, I saw these trips as adventures. We would stop at small towns and cities along the way: Colorado Springs, Pueblo, Walsenburg, Trinidad, Raton, and Las Vegas. She is the person who educated and grounded me in culture, traditions, and a sense of place. These travels made me aware of my geographic background and cognizant of myself as a bilingual, bicultural person. In short, my grandmother helped me define and understand my cultural identity. This is my grandmother's adobe home, built in the 1930s. Her grandfather, Octaviano Segura, the town blacksmith, built the home for her and her 3 children. I spent my 3 summers there as a child. I met my family members, both close and distant, primos, tíos, tías. I learned about farming, farm animals, and the foods they provided. I learned Spanish and its distinct New Mexican dialect. It's a combination of archaic Spanish because of New Mexico's isolation from the rest of the Spanish-speaking world, the influence of Nahua, the Aztec language, which contributed words for animals, foods, and places. Also Spanglish, English words pronounced with a Spanish accent. For example, words such as estafeta, trancar, la sieta, tecolote, cayote, capulín, atole, chaquehue, parquear, la troca, la pompa. The house stood on a hill overlooking the Pecos Valley, which included barra strips, the acequia, vegetable gardens, small orchards, the Pecos River, and the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the distance. Who am I? ¿Quién soy yo? A children's book written by my friend Dr. George Rivera and illustrated by me is part of a series of bilingual children's books that recounts the adventures of a small boy, Pano, and his 2 dogs, Cholo and Vato. Their summer adventures gives children glimpses of Chicano culture and convey an appreciation about tradition, identity, and childhood discovery. The book cover on the left shows Pano picking chokecherries, capulín, and Cholo and Vato lending a paw. There's some eyes there, Willie. My grandmother used capulín to make jelly. Spreading this jelly over pan de horno, or adobe oven bread, was delicious. On the right side is an illustration on page 1. The story starts with the grandmother telling Pano about family and relationships. After my grandmother's death in 1995, I had a dream about her home in Pecos, New Mexico, with santos on her porch and a procession carrying a Madonna. I made this image about 15 years after my dream when I began to create etchings. I added watercolor after I printed it. Watercolor works in harmony because it's transparent and reveals the contrasting lines of the etching. I want to share a video created by ArtLife and sponsored by Liquitex Paint last year during my sabbatical. I make art just like I need to breathe, or I make art just like I need to eat. I mean, I make art because I need to. That's how I survive. My work is about identity. It's about being Mexican-American. My name is Tony Ortega. I'm a visual artist, a painter, printmaker. I live here in Denver, Colorado. I see myself as an expressionistic artist. I work from the heart. I work with a real bold use of color, not necessarily primary color, but color that has a little more saturation, a little more punch to it. What I'm doing is I'm using alternative tools to make marks. Not trying to simulate the texture, but to exaggerate it a little bit. Initially, when I first started making my work, I started doing genre scenes, everyday life. But also I started painting the collective, the community, family, the workers, students, commuters, athletes, whatever I could find in the neighborhood where my studio was or throughout my travels. And I've been making these hybrid images. And these hybrid images are drawn from popular American culture and popular Mexican culture. So I'll bring Our Lady of Guadalupe with the Statue of Liberty, or I'll put Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera as Mexican Gothic instead of American Gothic. But recently I've been making some silkscreen, but working with acrylic underpainting. And I think that, artists are more open now to not just using a paintbrush. So I've been using scrapers, I've been sanding back into things. I've also been using squeegees in order to move the paint. So I've been diluting the paint a little bit with acrylic medium to make it more transparent, and then painting it on the panels, and then using squeegees to have the colors run together, blend together. But you see transitions. You don't get quite as smooth of a transition as a silkscreen, but you get some wonderful sort of atmospheric, sort of watercolor kind of technique. So since the layers are transparent, those colors reveal some of the undercolors. So even though you have an undercolor and you paint on top, there's either some kind of mixing or revealing or hiding through that layering process. Mexican-American and being a painter, people just assume, oh, you must know how to do murals. So initially when I first started doing murals, I was asked and I said, sure, I'll try it. And usually the people, the patients or the students in the school help me do this collaborative piece. Well, it has to be very important to you to be a maker of objects, to be creative, to work with your hands, and then combine that with ideas and a way of communicating your ideas. I've always thought being an artist, that to me process is more important than product. Just the act of creating and creating and creating. I want to show you a few examples of earlier work. This is the work I created prior to working at Regis. This is the work I showed commercially in galleries, art spaces, and museums. My pastel drawings were the central work I made and exhibited. The collective is the primary focus in my pastels. Individuals in my drawings are faceless because they are important and that they help define the group, the community, interacting and participating in its many rituals, social settings, and group functions. My artwork reflects the human experience through individual slices of life, of the community, families, and other sectors of urban and rural society. It is the collective that is important to me, the family, the workers, the students, the people in the park, and at the bus stop. As an expressionist, I use distortion and exaggeration for emotional effect. I paint for the heart, not for the mind or the eye. I show the mark making, cross-hatching with exaggerated color. I combine flat space with cubicle space. My work interweaves the Western concept of perspective, light and shadow, with overlapping lines of color. I merge abstraction, simplification, and realism. I paint the collective, the grouping, the family, the workers, the students, not the individual. This piece that you're looking at here is actually from across the highway over in Rocky Mountain Park, when I would ride my bike or walk the dog, or I'd take the camera with me and take these images and then take them back to my studio and make them. This is an image of West Denver. I overlap pastel on top of a monotype. A monotype is created by painting onto a sheet of plexiglass with etching inks. Once I finish painting the image, I transfer it onto a black paper by running it through a printing press. Please note the matte and flat areas of color. They are part of the monotype. So if you look at the two central figures on the bike, or if you look at the middle ground with the girls walking on the sidewalk, that's monotype. I enjoy making images about the night, as I can replace dark black areas with more saturated dark blues and violets. This is a pastel of migrant workers in Orange County, California, as they are picking strawberries very close to the airport. Los de abajo, or those from below, or the underdogs. Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers used Our Lady of Guadalupe as a union and political symbol. She was a rallying figure who helped unite the workers, the union, and their supporters. I asked the viewers, who are these people that pick our fruits and vegetables for our grocery stores and eventually our dining tables? Over the years, my wife, Sylvia, who is also an artist, have traveled together to a variety of Latin American countries. They include Mexico, Guatemala, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Colombia, and Cuba. This is a pastel as a result of our trip to Guatemala. It is of a mercado in Guatemala City. On my trips and at home, I look for gathering places, and the mercado is a perfect place. For this pastel, I play with light and shade. I tilt the stairs slightly to the left to create a sense of movement. The smaller colored shapes of people and their wares create rhythm. This is from a trip to Cuba in 2003. I spent 10 days visiting the country. We traveled to the city of Viñales, near many of the tobacco farms, which are used to make the famous Cuban cigars. Because of the US embargo, there are very few brand new cars, so many Cubans travel on imported Chinese bicycles. We have traveled to Mexico for Day of the Dead. We visited Oaxaca and Pátzcuaro for this celebration. We spent the night in a graveyard with families as we waited for the return of the spirits of the deceased. Family members clean off the graves, place marigolds, cempasúchil, candles, photographs of the dead, and the deceased favorite foods and drinks. Many of my family members have worked in the service industry here in Colorado, New Mexico, and California. The next couple of charcoal drawings are a tribute to their hard work, their contributions to our economy, and their help in our daily lives. My grandmother cleaned people's homes as well as being a seamstress. My uncle worked as a parking lot attendant and also in a packing plant. My mother worked as a nurse's aide in a nursing home, and an admissions clerk at the Denver General. This is why I focus much of my artwork on the people who work in the service industry. In my drawings, I use controlled scribbling and density of line to create tonality. Viewers of my work often ask, why no features? And I respond, how deeply do we see the people who clean our schools, cut our lawns, take care of our children? Do they take a deep look into their faces? Are they invisible to us? I recall the book I read as a freshman, The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This is one of the first paintings I began to contextualize place with the activities in the neighborhood. I used the Hybridity bus bench advertisement and a Rocky Mountain news dispenser to show Northwest Denver. At that time, formally, I began to use the rough side of masonite and use black gesso as a primer. I am emulating the formal qualities of my pastels with opaque color on dark backgrounds. About 1991, for the PBS station Channel 12 and the program Teletoons, many of us artists were asked to create a backdrop for the VJ. This image was created at a time when I lived and worked at and had a studio at 32nd and Zuni. The view from my second floor apartment reminded me of the Alfred Hitchcock movie Rear Window with Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly. Across the street at the Weir Building, there were second and third floor apartments and ground level storefronts. In one of these small storefronts, there was a nonprofit that worked with North High School students who were interested in being entrepreneurs and learning how to run a small business. When they would take breaks, they would gather out front near the bus stop. I created studies and eventually this painting. Also, I began to collage posters from the neighborhood, copying graffiti and inventing graffiti. The posters were announcements of the activities in the neighborhood. They'd included posters of a New Year's Eve Latino dance, a Cinco de Mayo celebration, and a garage sale. The graffiti included tags by local gangs like the Inca Boys, the Warlords, and the acronym SIDA Mata, which in translation means AIDS kills. I later exhibited this large painting at the William Havoo Gallery, and the Denver Art Museum purchased it for its collection. After a hard day's work, isn't it time for a cold cerveza? In this acrylic painting, the background becomes more abstract and simplified with torn posters, and I covered the background with a light blue, semi-transparent acrylic wash that pushes the negative space back. There are a couple silkscreen images of Lupe Liberty, and I draw a Taco Bell Chihuahua waiting to pull up a chair to share a beer. Since childhood, I've enjoyed riding bicycles. I enjoy painting people on bikes. I like the way a person on a bike divides the negative space and partially reveals the background. On the left side, I drew an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. On the right side, I drew a Statue of Liberty. The bicyclist divides these two images, thus the title, A Separation of Church and State. Many times, my titles are Doble Sentido on the meaning of the artwork. I used a photograph from my trip to Trinidad, Cuba. To create this painting. The town of Trinidad, Cuba is a World Heritage Site. On my visit that day, there were a variety of groups being led by a guide telling the history of Trinidad. These young girls were listening to one of the guides as they are holding the notes, holding onto their notes. I juxtaposed the girls with a background of a butterfly, Lupe Liberty, and Paris Hilton. Instead of collaging found posters into my paintings, I started painting into the posters. With these images, I'm asking the viewer to see deeper. These posters were used to advertise Mexican musical groups who were touring the area. Note the local Colorado phone numbers and local addresses to purchase concert tickets and the mix of Spanish and English. The middle ground has a service worker. The foreground has a well-known American icon of Uncle Sam. This image also has an advertisement of a Mexican band, a car mechanic, and a pop image of Speedy Gonzalez, thus the title, Speedy Mechanic. The title of this painting, Dreamers, should lead the viewer to the layered meaning behind it. On one level, the card players are dreaming of winning the card game by having the best hand or bluffing. On the other level, they are dreamers who were brought to the United States as small children from Mexico by their parents. Their parents work in the service industry, and their children attend U.S. schools. They learned English and became Americanized. Since dreamers are here in the U.S. without proper documentation, many have hopes and dreams of becoming citizens. What river are they crossing? Why are they crossing the river? What awaits them on the other side? I collaged a grid of newspaper proofs of one of my lithographs. I created a parody of Warhol's Campbell's soup cans. Can you see the images of Campbell's menudo? For 25 years, I have worked with schools, health clinics, community organizations, art spaces, and museums to create murals. The creation of community murals belongs to everyone, not just the wealthy, art galleries and museums. Community murals are not created for art's sake, but rather give a community the skills and voice necessary to maintain this art form. The mural process encourages participants of different ages, socioeconomic backgrounds to collaborate, develop friendships, and learn from each other while developing their art skills. I believe the people involved in the painting process feel an ownership to the mural and are proud of their work. Participants enjoy bringing their friends, family members, etc., to show them what they've contributed to the mural painting process. The mural reflects the needs, hopes, and dreams of the community who create them. This school mural was created in February of 2018 during my sabbatical. I worked with about 300 students, 3rd through 5th grade. They did rotations of 5 to 7 students every 30 minutes throughout the school day. I want to show a time-lapse video of that process. I teach Chicanismo, Chicanarte, an integrative core course every other school year. This course looks at the artwork, artists, and ideas that have been informed by the Chicano civil rights movement. As part of this course in 2015, my Regis students and I worked with the 5th graders at Escuela Guadalupe. This here is the outline or the design of the mural. It's approximately 6 feet by 9 feet tall. On the first day of the mural, the Regis students worked together with the 5th graders of Escuela Guadalupe. They're beginning to paint the hard-edged, darker colors. Everyone contributes in the mixing of the colors as well as all the painting techniques. There were 20 Regis students and about the same number of 5th graders. They did rotations of students every 45 minutes. The hard edge undercolor takes the longest since it covers every inch of the canvas. After about 2 days of painting, we're almost finished with the undercolor. At this point, the skin tones are painted an earthy green. The undercolor of the grass area is painted with a dark, rusty red. Kids always ask me, why green faces? There's a new thing for you, Willie. Here's a student is just demonstrating how to do the dry brush technique. It is best to use a cheap brush with a bad hair day to do this technique. The idea is to overlap a lighter color over the darker color without completely covering it. Oops, went the wrong way. This image shows the mural once the dry brush is complete. So it's like 4 days into it. Everybody proudly smiles as they are painting with a pointillistic brush work that includes dots, dashes, and simple patterns. Here's the finished mural. The storyteller is in the front. The 5th grade students are seated to his left. Behind them are the Regis students. To the right of the storyteller are 2 dancing calaveras. Along the side is a Pachuco couple. This is the same year we had Daniel Valdez visit our campus, and he taught the students and worked with the students. And we also showed the movie Zoot Suit. In the center middle ground are migrant workers picking strawberries. On the middle ground edges are folklorico dancers. The center background has a pyramid of Kulkulkan and is overlapped by Our Lady of Guadalupe. Think they did a good job? This is another example of a mural. I collaborated with high school students and their club, Future Farmers of America, in Idalia, Colorado, which is on the border of the Colorado-Kansas border. I worked over a weekend with children of the Carbondale area. This mural includes Main Street, Carbondale, with Mount Cypress in the background. I create my etchings with light-sensitive Palmer plates. I start by creating a film positive, by selecting one of my drawings and making an overhead transparency. I expose the film onto an etching plate with UV light. Wherever the light passes through the film, the Palmer becomes hard. Wherever the light does not pass through the film, the Palmer remains soft and water-soluble. I then etch the plate with water and brush out the soft Palmer. After the plate is etched and dry, I can ink and wipe the plate, just like a traditional etching. This image, Western Union, I used 3 drawings of service workers, and I overlapped them over a telegram document that is used to send money back to Mexico. I know Tom did this definition for me, but I'm going to repeat it for you. But hybridity is the process that crosses 2 separate cultures. It is a constant process of negotiating between different cultural groups, a form of intercultural dialogue. Hybridity can be viewed as the space where communication between cultures take place. As a Chicano artist, my identity, as well as my cultural and geographic backgrounds, are integral in my art. For me and for numerous Chicano artists, our experiences, our cultural hybridity, are the foundations of our artwork. As we address distinctions between the worlds we experience and how they combine to form our identity. I can address the differences in my world, forming a new and more accurate personal and cultural identity. Doble Sentido, the title of my lecture, translates to double meaning, dual significance. But I like a more nuanced meaning by using it as layered meaning, pun, play on words, or play on images. One of the things I enjoy most about teaching is I, too, get to learn from my students. Every fall, I teach the Design Foundation course. I work with students whose media interests vary from drawing to painting to sculpture to photography to digital imaging. I learned how to use Photoshop by watching and listening to my students and taking these lessons and practicing them. Lupe Liberty is the first successful digital image I created. I appropriated a high-resolution image of the Statue of Liberty from the internet and blended it with my photo of a statue of Guadalupe. In the summer of 2006, I was invited to be an artist in residence for a week at the Serre Project in Austin, Texas. While there, I collaborated with a master printer to create a silkscreen print. I created the separations and selected the colors, while the master printer printed the edition of 50 prints. I mixed my digital image of Lupe Liberty with a drawing of A Day Without Immigrants. A Day Without Immigrants was a national boycott. General strike rallies and symbolic actions were held in order to demand basic rights for all immigrants and foster a new multi-ethnic united civil rights movement. As a printmaker, I create art by combining digital technology and traditional printmaking techniques. I use Photoshop to merge a variety of appropriated images into a composition. Both the practices of printmaking and working in Photoshop involve working in layers and separations, a natural mix for me. Working and responding to new technologies and integrating the hybridization of cultural differences have become an integral part of my prints. I superimposed famous Latino faces over those of the faces of the US presidents. From left to right, Cesar Chavez, Che Ernesto Guevara, Frida Kahlo, and a local Chicano leader, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez. So I was invited to the Serre Project 3 different times, 2006, 2010, and 2014. Most of my recent work interweaves, juxtaposes, and superimposes unlikely images from American and Mexican popular cultures that include icons, symbols, history, and the contemporary world to foster opportunities for the blending of meaning. I combined two female images. I used the Statue of Liberty, one of the most recognizable icons of America, to represent liberty and escape from oppression. I used Our Lady of Guadalupe, a Catholic icon, and Mexico's most popular image. In this hand-colored etching, Juan Wayne, I make over John Wayne's character of Rooster Cogburn from the 1969 movie True Grit into a Mexican cowboy, or vaquero, the original cowboy. I ask the question, who is the true cowboy? Hollywood's version, or the person who works every day with cattle? Campbell's Pozole, Campbell's Menudo are both parodies of the famous Andy Warhol artwork, Campbell's Soup Cans. The prints show the superimposing of unlikely images of traditional Mexican stews as Campbell's soup products. Pozole and Menudo are homemade meals my grandmother made. Fortunately for us, Campbell's doesn't make canned pozole and menudo. Perhaps that'll change. Mexican Gothic is a parody of the famous Grant Wood painting, American Gothic. I superimposed Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera over the protective farmer and his daughter, who is often erroneously identified to be his wife. I demonstrate that we as Latinos can also claim the United States as our home. Our history in the American Southwest precedes the establishment of the Plymouth colony. As a child in the 1960s, I enjoyed watching cartoons, and I liked the Warren Brothers cartoonist, Speedy Gonzales. He was the border hero, the super fast mouse, who saved his drunken Mexican friends from the gringo gato, who tried to lure the mice on the border with cheese. Super hombre con sombrero turns Superman into a brown Mexican superhero. I changed the colors of the superhero suit from red, white, and blue, the colors of the American flag, to the colors of the Mexican flag. He stands in front of the Pyramid of the Sun in the ruins of Teotihuacan, wearing his business suit and a tourist Mexican sombrero. This superhero is at the moment when he's changing from being incognito to super hombre. And yes, he proudly opens his shirt to show off his super hombre logo. In my watercolored etching, Super Hombre Jesus, I place a statue of Jesus Christ at the top of the Pyramid of the Sun at the ruins of Teotihuacan. Teotihuacan is a Nahua word which means the place where the gods were created. Jesus is holding his robe open to bear the logo of Super Hombre rather than the Catholic symbol of the Sacred Heart. I always thought the statue over here, how ironic it is. Jesus holds his robe open. It's the same gesture as Superman. In Super Hombre, I turned Superman into a brown Mexican hero. This Super Hombre leaps over pyramids in a single bound rather than leaping over skyscrapers. And yes, he proudly shows off his manly macho mustache. In this hand-colored silkscreen, I merged Wonder Woman with Frida Kahlo. I used the same process you saw in the first video I shared with you. I used a squeegee to paint the background. I hand-painted the undercolor of the figure, and finally I silkscreened black on top of it. Some of the inspirations come from printmaking traditions in Mexico, and some good examples are the prints of José Guadalupe Posada, who used humor, parody, and doble sentido in portraying the lives of the upper and peasant classes in the late 19th and early 20th century. Chicano artists rediscover Posada and have portrayed him as the father of contemporary Mexican printmaking. I, too, see Posada as an inspiration in my use of doble sentido. My retablo, Tío Samuel, examines the Mexican celebration of Day of the Dead and its influence on American popular culture. We not look any further than the most recent popular Disney movie, Coco. I replace Uncle Sam with a skeletal Mexican charro who asks us to join him in remembering and celebrating our ancestors on this special day. Many times, as I'm working on a new image, I don't know the meaning of the work until after I complete it. Sometimes I have to sleep on it, or it might take a few days or weeks. But usually I'm not thinking about the artwork and not even doing an art activity. I'm taking a shower or riding my bike and have an epiphany. This is a good example of that. El Grito de Guadalupe takes on the topic of children separated from their parents at the US-Mexican border. I inserted Edvard Munch's The Scream into the image of Our Lady Guadalupe. In her Catholic story, Guadalupe was once a human, a woman, a mother. She can empathize with a parent who is forcibly separated from her child. We are witness to her pain and anger with the power and the abuse the United States government has over poor immigrant families. In my most recent works, I use parody and humor to create artworks that comment on the changing demographics and culture in the United States. I hope my artwork leaves a smile on the viewer's face, but also that they become aware that the artwork is layered in meaning and doble sentido. Thank you.